Get started. So hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Ian with Writing Launch, and today I'm going to be taking you through a step-by-step process of what it's like to get freelance writing jobs. And I do want to say from the get-go that this is applicable to people who have no experience, to have some experience, to people who have a portfolio. If you don't, that's okay. We're going to be going over how to do that step by step. And what we try to do with these webinars is really provide, an entry level solution to people who are looking to getting into freelance writing, because it can be an intimidating thing. Every day we get messages from people who tell us that they just don't know where to go to learn about freelance writing. And there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. And so I'm hoping to debunk some of the myths you've heard today. And in the webinar today that's going to run for the next hour or so, we're going to have both an instructional part where I'll talk about everything from finding jobs to solidifying your voice. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A segment. So if you have a question, make sure to ask it, and we'll get around to that at the end, toward the end of the webinar today. And if you have any questions afterward, you can always email us at support@writinglaunch.com, and we'll get back to you. And if you're watching this later, feel free to email us, because we have some folks watching the replay. So if you're watching now, feel free to ask in the Q&A or in the email. And if you're watching later, make sure to ask in the email. So without further ado, let's get started here. So let me get this played. And here we are. So the information today is going to be coming from our No BS course on freelance writing. This is our flagship course for freelance writing, and it goes over all the basics you need to know. And so all the information that I'm going to be telling you today is basically a free preview of that course. So if you're interested in that, be sure to stick around. Today I want to kind of frame this webinar in 3 tips, because I like tips. Tips are easy to remember. It's easy to break down a process like that. So I wanted to break this into 3 tips for finding freelance writing work. The first tip is to find your hotspots, and I'll explain what all these mean in just a moment. The second is to write for online publications. This is a big tip that I'm going to be going over in detail. And 3, build connections through repeat business. And this is something I've only touched on a little bit in previous webinars, so this is pretty new information, and I hope that you will enjoy it. So let's get started. So number 1 is finding your hotspot. Now, what do I mean by finding your hotspot? Well, a hotspot is basically a website or any sort of resource really that provides you with good freelance writing jobs. And some examples are job boards. These are a big source of hotspots. Social media sites like Reddit and LinkedIn, really any platform where there are jobs posted. And social media groups as well. These are all kind of examples of what a hotspot is. Now, of course, a hotspot is only a hotspot if it provides you with good work. So you'll have to find out where your hotspots are, but I'll go over that in the coming minutes. Hotspots, they just aren't universal, and what works for one writer may not work for another. And that's just in part due to the fact that there is such a wide variety of work out there. We have writers, we have members in Writing Launch who range from specializing in Christian faith-based articles all the way to finance and things like that. And so what works for one writer is probably not going to work for another who does a really different type of writing. So when I'm giving you all this information, please do keep that in mind, that you'll have to test it out for yourself, see what works. Now, I think the real question, though, is how do you find hotspots? And this can be tricky, because this is where a lot of beginner writers run into problems, because it can be hard to find hotspots. I know that when you start out, you're probably on Indeed, you're on Monster, Career Builder, maybe these sites that are kind of traditional job boards. Maybe you're looking at like Craigslist or something like that, or Kijiji or whatever. And those are really not the best places to be looking. So where do you find hotspots? Well, I'll give you a few ways to find them. One way is to take a look at popular job boards and sites and groups. And when it comes to job boards, it is a really sort of your mileage may vary situation where some job boards may be really good, other job boards may be really bad. You just have to find that out from experience. And then other general websites and social media sites and social media groups, like I mentioned, the most popular ones will usually have a good selection of jobs. You might also ask other writers where they find their jobs. And this is also a bit of networking, which we'll get into a little later. But this is no doubt an important part of the freelance writer's toolbox, is connecting with other writers and asking about it. Fun fact, I got my biggest writing job that I still have today, and I've had it for the last 3 years, just because I got referred by another writer. And this writer just saw me posting, helping people out online, and he was like, hey, I have a colleague, a client who needs some work done. Are you up for it? And so I've had that client for 3-4 years coming on now. So that's a big plus if you know other writers. And if you don't, the comment section of this webinar is a great place to find other people to network with. If you're interested in that, just drop a line below and let other people know that you're interested in networking with maybe specific types of writers. We always love to see people interacting in the comments, and we have a great group of people here. But that's a great way to find hotspots as well. And like I said, over time, you will find out which sites give you the best jobs. It is trial and error. Honestly, it takes a good bit of work and time. It's not an overnight thing. But on the plus side, once you know, then you'll probably have a good resource to come back to. Yeah, and like I said, it can take a while, but please do not get discouraged, because you're making progress even if you're just searching and applying for jobs. That's progress. It can be really easy to kind of fool yourself into thinking that you're not making progress just because you're not actually getting jobs. You're kind of running into dead ends maybe, or something like that. But as long as you're just on the hunt, that's what counts. As long as you're searching and applying, that is ultimately what counts. Now, let's talk about how to evaluate hotspots, because once you find a site or a group or a job board that you think may be a hotspot, you don't know for sure, and you have to test it. You have to evaluate it. So how do you do that? Well, one is to look at the volume of available jobs. Ideally, you do want a hotspot that has a good amount of jobs available. You also want to look at the quality of available jobs. So take a look at each job position and evaluate it. Is it the kind of thing that you're after? Is it does it meet your expectations, etc. You want to look at also the quality of the job postings. Are the job postings well written? Are they informative? Do they provide you with everything that you need to know? Or do they leave you asking questions and scratching in your head about what the heck did I just read? Because I've seen some job postings like that where they're just so terribly vague. And you also want to look at the clients. So, before you apply for a job, do a little bit of research on the client or the brand or the business behind it. Just plop their name into Google, see what comes up. They might have, some reviews, maybe some Glassdoor reviews or something like that, where employees can tell you what they think of the experience of working there. And really just their online presence in general is helpful to get a better understanding of them. And when it comes to clients, you want to look at, like I said earlier, the type, the volume, and the quality of them. So, what type of clients are there on this job board, on this hotspot? Do they fit you? Do they not? Is there a good volume of suitable clients for you? And how's the quality? These are all really important questions to ask. And you also want to think just broadly about what type of people the hotspot attracts. In my experience, certain job boards tend to attract certain types of people. And for instance, there's the site ProBlogger, which I'll talk about later, which is an online job board for writing jobs. And they tend to attract a lot of financial blogs and copywriting blogs and businesses like that. And there's really not a lot of variety on there. But if you do that kind of work, then it's a great place to be. So that's a good example of just knowing what type of audience to expect from any certain hotspot. Now let's talk about writing for online publications. So that first tip was sort of just like a general tip. Now I want to get a little more specific and talk about online publications, because in my experience, this is where a lot of writers want to be in. A lot of our writers that we take into Writing Launch, they are creative writers or former creative writers who are interested in going into publication writing. So instead of doing work for clients or for brands, they're doing articles for publications, and that tends to be a little bit more of a creative type pursuit. So I think this is going to be a really big tip. And even if you don't think you're interested in this, please do hang around, because I think that you'll be surprised at how enticing this option is. And whenever anyone asks me how to make money with freelance writing, this is what I tell them. So contributing to online publications is one of the best ways to get started. This is how I got started. It's really how I built my career. Early on, I was doing a lot of work for publications. I was doing a lot of articles, a lot of guest posts, and it really allowed my career to take off. So when I talk about writing to online publications, I'm talking about writing an article for maybe Smithsonian Magazine online or Forbes's website. And here I am just talking about specifically online publications. This sort of applies to print as well, but online is easier to get into, and frankly, there's just more available online publications than there are print publications. So that's why I'm talking about online publications only for this section. And what I love about this is that it's not only easy, but it requires no experience. I had no experience when I started out. I was just, in college. I had a few writing pieces, but when I did my first initial posts, I had nothing. And so that didn't matter. It didn't matter that I didn't have a portfolio. It just mattered that I had a good idea and some good writing skills. And like I just alluded to, you don't need a portfolio to get started. And this is why it's such a good method of getting into freelance writing. So if you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't have a portfolio of any work, I haven't had anything published, how am I going to get started? This is your answer. Trust me, this is the best way to get started from absolute scratch. And that's because many publications that accept contributions from freelance writers don't require any experience at all. It's just not really a thing that a lot of publications want, surprisingly. They're more interested in whether you have a good idea, a good article, a good voice, a compelling perspective on things. That's what's going to matter more than your resume or, your credentials. And publications also pay much, much better than content mills and freelancing platforms. And I've talked about these in the past, but sites like Upwork and Fiverr and I think TextBroker, all these sites that maybe you're on right now, they pay just peanuts. It's nothing. And that's kind of where I started out, and I regret it because when I started writing for online publications, I got paid so much more than I ever had gotten paid for all the work I did on a freelancing platform. So it really is quality over quantity here. You'll get fewer articles published than you would if you were going through a content mill, but you'll also be getting paid 10, 50, 100 times the amount. It's crazy how big the divide is once you realize it. So how do you even get started with writing for online publications? First, I would say find publications in your niche. And that, of course, requires you to think a little bit about what your niche is, what industry you belong to, what topics you want to write about. And if you haven't gotten that down, that's fine. It will be something that I recommend thinking about. Generally, I recommend that writers, especially beginner freelance writers, start out with one niche just because that's more focused, it's easier to deal with, and it allows you to take a more honed approach to finding jobs. And Google is going to be your friend here. So you can just search, whatever your niche is, and then, blog or magazine or whatever, and you'll find a ton of results. And I want to show you some search tips that you can use in Google to find publications. So let's say you're in the spirituality niche, and this is just an example. You might search something like this. Now, this is a search result, or rather a search operator, that you can put into Google. So the first section of this is just whatever your niche is. In our case, it's spirituality. And then you do a space and the plus sign and another space. And then in quotes, it has writer's guidelines. Now, this is sort of a lot to unpack, so let me break it down. Writer's guidelines pages, as I'll talk about a little later, are pages that tell you everything you need to know about submitting to a publication. So it's basically the rules of how to submit to a publication. And what this search operator is doing is the quotes are binding together the term writer's guidelines. So if you didn't have those quotes, you would get results that only had writers or only had guidelines. So putting them in quotes binds them together as a phrase, so you'll only get that specific phrase back in your results. And then the plus sign is just making sure that you get results that have both of those, because when you don't have that, if you just put spirituality, writer's guidelines, you would get results that just had the word spirituality, that just had the word writers, and you don't want that, because what you're searching for here is a way to find publications that have writer's guidelines pages that are in the spirituality niche. Now, the writer's guidelines pages go by a few different names, such as the Write For Us page or submission guidelines page or even guest post. So these are all ways that you can search, alternate terms you can use to search for publications in your niche. And I would advise keeping these alternate names in mind. A lot of, some have editorial guidelines. It really depends. It's really a varied thing. So if you don't find a writer's guidelines page, maybe search for Write For Us, etc. But these search operators will serve you well. They have served me so well. I use them nearly daily. There was a while where I was using them countless times daily. If you do any sort of work on Google, I really, really recommend taking the time to learn some of these advanced search operators like the ones I've shown you here. So moving on from that, another way is to look at publications that you already read. Now, this is ideal because, and I'll talk about this, but you want to ideally be a reader of the publication that you submit to. And I know that's not always practical, but you want to at least get an idea of what the publication is, and the best way is to already be a reader. And since you'll already be familiar with the publication, you'll know what they want, you'll know who their audience is, you'll know what type of content they publish, you'll know what kind of tone they use. You'll just have this existing familiarity with them that will really come in handy once it comes time to pitch an article to them. And in keeping with the theme of asking other writers, you can ask other writers where they contribute. So, maybe post down below or post in a Facebook group that you're a part of, or ask people in real life, hey, I'm looking for publications in this niche. Do you happen to know of any? Or where do you contribute? Because I know we're in similar niches. Have conversations like that. They can be really, really helpful. And of course, you want to study each publication that you find. And I recommend reading at the very least, bare minimum, 5 to 10 articles and analyze them. And like I mentioned, you want to be familiar with the publication. You want to understand what type of content they publish. You want to understand what voice they use. You want to understand who their audience is. And that's really hard to do if you've only read 1 or 2 articles. So a minimum of 5 to 10, I would say. If you want to read more than that, go ahead. And you don't have to read them, in super detail. You can skim them with the goal of analyzing them, but you do want to be thorough when it comes to this. It's an important part because otherwise you might not nail the tone or the content style that the publication is looking for, and that could, of course, cost you. And like I mentioned, you want to think about who the audience is. A great way is to check comment sections. You want to think about what kind of articles they publish. And this goes everything from the types of titles they use to the types of headings they use to the actual tone of the writing to the subject matter to the industry, all of that stuff. Yeah, you want to think about topic, style, really everything. You want to consider this holistically. And like I alluded to earlier, you want to look for a writer's guidelines page because this is the page that's going to tell you everything you need to do to successfully write for the publication, to successfully pitch them. And this is important because I'll take a moment to share this anecdote that I've shared before where many writers don't get published in publications because they don't read the guidelines. There have been so many stories I've heard where you have two writers and one follows the guidelines and the other doesn't, and then the one who followed the guidelines gets the job. And it really is that crucial because, publications are usually fairly busy. Most publications have a lot of writers wanting to write for them. And that's important because that lets you know that you have competition. You have to make yourself stand out. And so when it comes to just even the basics of pitching them, if you're not following all of their guidelines down to the letter, that tells them that you haven't read, you haven't done your homework, you haven't read the guidelines. And so that's going to be incredibly important when it comes to wanting to pitch. So that's an absolutely crucial part. And to make all this easier on you, because I know it's still a hassle to find good resources, we're going to be sending you our free resource, the Paid Publishing Guidebook. And this is really my favorite resource that we send out. It's really one that I wish I had when I was starting, because back when I was submitting to blogs, I had to find them just by Googling and by searching and by brute force. Later, when I started writing for Freedom with Writing, I was able to get a lot of resources from there. And basically what we've done with this is taken a lot of that stuff from Freedom with Writing, a lot of those magazines and websites and blogs, and compiled them into this huge book that has hundreds of publications that pay writers. And I do want to note that not all these are digital, but most of them at least are digital or have a digital counterpart. So they will be perfect for you in your quest to find good publications. So this is going to be coming to you in your email over the next few days. So just keep an eye out for that, and it will be right in your inbox. And I know for a fact you'll enjoy this. And on top of that, because pitching is a field of study on its own. We've had entire webinars on pitching before. It's really not something that I can go a lot of depth into right now because we only have an hour together. So what I want to send you also is my road-tested pitch template. What I did here was I looked at all my successful pitches and I thought to myself, okay, what similarities do they share? And I noticed that there were a lot of common threads in each pitch. So what I did was I pulled out those common threads and I kind of knit this new template together. So this is basically my successful template, and this has worked for me. I know it'll work for you. Do a little bit of a customization on it, spice it up in your own style, but don't be afraid to use this. And we're going to be sending this out in your email over the next couple days. Now I want to talk about building connections through repeat business. And like I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, this is kind of new information. It's stuff I've only recently started talking about, and it's already helped a lot of people, and I hope it will help you too, because it's a really critical part of the freelance writer's life, professional life, and I think it would be remiss of me to not go over this in a webinar. So let's talk about it. Now, your network, and if you have a network, you already know this, it's absolutely critical. A good network can really sustain you. It can really help you out in terms of finding jobs and meeting with other writers and getting repeat business, as the title suggests. And basically, the stronger your network is, the more jobs you'll get, and the higher the quality will be, and the more you'll get paid. So it's a really win-win-win situation here. Repeat clients are going to be some of the most important aspects of a good freelance career. I mentioned earlier that I have one client that I've worked with for 3 years, three to 4 years now, and it's a great relationship. I love working with him. He's great. I've done so much work through him. I mean, every few months I do a big ebook for him, and it's just a great relationship overall. And so focusing on building and nurturing and extending those kinds of relationships is really important when you kind of want to go to the next step. So far, I've just kind of talked about how to get started, and this is sort of a peek into what the next step is, because I don't want to leave you hanging just at the first step with no direction to go. So once you have the basics done, you have a portfolio down, maybe you have a few pieces, you've gotten some articles published, you want to look at getting repeat business with either private clients, such as individual entrepreneurs or business people or businesses, or a repeat business through the blogs and publications that you write for. And it is common to develop these types of long-term relationships that bring you steady work on an ongoing basis. You just have to know how to get them and really where to look. Referrals are also really important. I've gotten a lot of business through referrals, and it never hurts to ask for a referral. They're fantastic because that way you have a foot in the door with someone new, and you have the opportunity to build your network even larger, and you already have that sort of warm. You've sort of warmed up this new person to you just by virtue of you being referred by someone they know. And I go over this a lot in my marketing writing, but word of mouth is surprisingly the most powerful form of marketing over everything else, literally. So that comes in here, people are going to trust a friend or a colleague over some random freelancer that they see on the streets, as it were. So that if you can get in this space where you're working with people and you're having repeat business and you're getting referrals, that is really the best place to be as a freelance writer. Yeah, like I mentioned, the word of mouth is the single most powerful and most trustworthy form of marketing. And of course, like I said, you can think about this as, who would you trust more, a stranger or your mother or, a friend of yours? Yeah, it goes like that. And so when it comes to getting jobs, word of mouth is a big, big part of it, even more important than, getting your name out there online. Now, let's talk about how to maximize the chances of repeat business, because that can be a little tricky to do. How do you ensure that? Well, the first step, I think, is treating every job as if it's one of many. So a lot of freelance writers get these one-off jobs, and we're kind of used to that. And maybe you've had some one-off jobs. I know I've had a bunch, but I think that the better attitude to take is to treat every job you take as if it's just the first in a series of jobs. So, if you get just a one-off job and it's going to be one-off, just treat it as if you're going to be working with a client again anyway. That's sort of the best case scenario, because if you do end up working with them again, then you'll already have that sort of relationship, that sort of a dynamic established. And of course, follow up after the initial task is finished. So even if you have a job that is just a one-off thing, it never hurts to ask at the end, hey, do you need any more work done? And if not, if you could pass my name along to anyone who does, that would be great. Or if you know anyone, could you pass my name along and, contact information? That is critical because surprisingly, a lot of people will say yes. A lot of people will either realize that they need more work done, or they'll know someone else who has work that needs done. So it's really a win-win if you can get either a repeat business or referral business. And a simple, saying just as simple as, is there anything else you need help with? That's often going to do the trick. You don't need to make a big deal out of it. You don't need to worry about it. You just need to kind of ask it almost in passing, but just, focus on it, but just don't make a big deal out of it. And a lot of times, like I said, people will say yes. It's quite surprising. And of course, if they say yes, you've got a repeat client. Yay. And if they say no, like I mentioned, you can just ask the client to pass your name along to anyone they know who needs writing done. One stipulation I will make here is that with publications, it's a bit different. So after you get an article published, you can submit another one, and usually that's how it goes. And they'll either say yes or no. Little tongue twister there. And if they say no, it's important to not keep bugging that publication, and certainly don't bug the editors, because editors are insanely busy people, and really you should take pity on them because they have, very, very tough and busy jobs. But the point of saying that is, when it comes to publications, keep submitting if you get a yes. And if you get a no, you can try submitting to that publication again, or you can start looking at other publications, because sometimes when it comes to writing for publications, some just don't want several articles by the same writer. Some just don't have the editorial space for a lot of articles at once. There are a lot of factors that play into it. So you can't always assume that you're just going to be able to successfully submit article after article just because you got one yes, if that makes sense. I hope that's clear enough. And if you have questions about that, like I said, make sure to ask below, and we'll have the Q&A here in a few minutes. But yeah, with publications, keep submitting, and then if they say no, I would suggest going to a different publications just for variety, but of course it's good to get repeat business if you can. And of course, this is also a great way to expand your network through word of mouth. Even if you don't end up getting jobs out of this process, you might meet new people, you might get your name out there, and that can be just as effective as, getting a referral. So you never know until you try, and this is definitely a great way of expanding your network and increasing your chances of getting jobs. Another key point is to seek out long-term jobs. Now, this is a little tricky because sometimes you don't always know which jobs will be long-term and short-term, but as much as possible, you want to seek out long-term jobs. One way to do this is to look for job postings that describe bigger projects. So maybe there's a job posting that talks about needing an ebook done or something like that, or maybe a series of articles, let's say. Those are really good indicators that the job will be a long-term job. If it's just saying like, oh, hey, I need a cover letter done for Monday, that's probably not going to be a job where you can get repeat business. But if it's something like, we need ongoing work, or we need someone in this position, then that's a good indicator that you're going to be looking at a long-term job. Now, short-term jobs do tend to be just one-off projects. You can have short-term jobs that range from a couple days to a couple months or so. That's kind of common, but generally, when you're looking at long-term, you're looking at, a few months plus maybe. But from short-term jobs, even if you don't get repeat business from them, you may grow your network from them, and that's really good to have. I have a lot of people in my network currently that I've just had one-off jobs with, and they've either come back to me or they've come to me and said that they have someone who needs work done. So even if I guess what I'm saying there is, don't think a connection is dead just because it's a one-off job or just because it's a job you did a while back. I had people come to me literally years after I worked with them and say like, oh, hey, a friend needs work, or hey, I need some more work done. So you never know when that opportunity is going to strike. And another thing is to not count on clients to be long-term. And even if a long-term client is, the type of client you have, even if you've established that, hey, we're going to be working together for the next 6 months, that can change. And so it's good not to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, because even repeat clients can just vanish, or they can fire you out of nowhere. And so that's why you want to diversify your client structure, your client base. Now we're going to have a Q&A here in a few minutes, so if you have questions, please do ask them down below. But I thought I'd go over a few frequently asked questions just to clear some things up. So the first question that we get a ton is, how do I get my first job without any experience? And I talked about this a bit in the webinar, but what I would say is, aim for online publications. Focus on your pitch, use that pitch template, really hone it, keep it short, keep it simple. Do not make a long pitch. That is the number one mistake that I see. People write these pitches that are almost as long as the articles themselves, and it's a lot for an editor to read. Like I mentioned, editors are really busy. They don't have a lot of time to be reading these novel length pitches, so you want to keep the pitch short, just a couple paragraphs. You'll see in the template when we send it out to you, but you want to keep it really short, really focused. And remember that clients and editors want you to deliver value. That is their end goal. So when people are looking for experience, they're not looking for someone with experience just for the sake of having experience. They just want to know that someone is going to deliver value for them. And this is sort of a business thing that I'm getting into, but this is what you need to be thinking about as a freelance writer, because, as a freelance writer, you are a solo entrepreneur. You're your own business. And so if you can convince people that you are going to deliver value for them, they'll choose you even sometimes over people who have more experience than you. It's a little hard to believe, but it happens. Another question we get asked so much is, does location matter? So we get a lot of writers from all parts of the world, saying, oh, I live in this country, that's maybe not the US or not a mainstream country, or, not a first world country even. And they ask, oh, can I still write? And of course you can, because location matters very rarely. The only things that I can think of where location matters are specific publications for specific areas, like maybe Ohio Magazine or something like that. But aside from those sorts of things, location matters very rarely. As long as you're a fluent English writer, that's really all that matters. Yeah, like I mentioned, some local or regional publications do count on you to have a certain location, but outside of that, I really haven't seen it. Another question we get asked a lot is something like, oh, I don't have a lot of time to write. Can I still pursue freelance writing? And absolutely. You can start a freelancing career in as little as an hour a day. So if you have an hour a day right now, that's already enough to build a career out of it. And again, that seems sort of far-fetched, but it's really the truth. And if you have trouble finding time, we're going to give you a resource here in a second, which is the Maximizing Your Writing Time guide. This is a little guide that we put together to help you understand how to reclaim time from your day, and basically find more time to write, because a lot of writers we find have time throughout the day where they can be doing things, and this is just sort of a general productivity issue, but a lot of people have these little pockets of time throughout the day that they either waste or just miss out on, and then they look back on their day and they're sort of like, oh, I could have used that time to write. And so what this short guide is going to do is to help you identify where you can reclaim time and just generally how you can find more time to write. And again, even if you just have an hour a day to write, that is already enough to get started. It doesn't take much. It's just about the work that you put in and about the focus you put in. So again, look for that coming out to your email in the next few days. So now we're going to get into the Q&A segment. So if you have questions, please do ask them below, and I'll gladly answer them. So let me get out of here real quick. Let me switch it back to my camera and the software there. Okay, so let's get into the Q&A. So if you've had questions, let me know. I'll go through and pick out some. MK asks, what is your opinion on simultaneous submissions? That's a great question. We get that one a lot, and it's a very understandable question, because the idea of simultaneous submissions is really alluring, right? You can write something once. Let me adjust my camera here a bit. You can write something once and then submit it in the multiple places. The problem with this is that if you remember when I was talking about delivering value, a lot of businesses and publications these days are very picky because there is more competition than ever before. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. And so as a result, what happens is publications and businesses in general, and really just anyone, ends up going with a writer who they feel suits their needs best. And often that will come down to creating content with that specific person or brand or company in mind. And so the problem with simultaneous submissions is that you're taking an article that either fits one publication really well and you're trying to kind of shoehorn it into other publications, but really what you're doing is devaluing all of those publications that you're submitting to, because you're saying, you're essentially saying that you didn't want to put in all the work. And of course, I'm not saying that you specifically would do that, but that's the message that gets sent to publications. And they can often tell, but also pieces that are general enough to be submitted to various places generally won't fit into any of them. The best route is to tailor make your content for each publication, and this is why I advocate pitching and not submitting articles. I think submitting entire articles is not only a waste of time, but also really risky, a waste of resources, and it just, it's more harm than good. So that's why I recommend just finding places that accept pitches instead of entire articles. Because some places do require you to submit entire articles right off the bat. I think that's a bad practice generally. It depends on the length and of the niche, but generally I think it's a bad practice. A place should always accept a pitch first, at least in my opinion. So when it comes to simultaneous submissions, I'm definitely against them just because it forces you to create content that is not fit, especially for one publication. And the thing is, when you do simultaneous submissions, you actually decrease your chances of getting published. And it doesn't seem like that, but what you're effectively doing is creating content that is so general that it can fit into any publication. And so when you do that, it lowers the chances that any one publication is going to say, oh, hey, I think this is right for us, because you didn't write it specifically for that publication. This is a topic I could go on a lot about, but I'll kind of leave it at that. So I'm definitely not for them. But, and a lot of places also won't accept them, so that's another thing. But yeah, I hope that helps answer that question. Thank you for asking that. Shiora asks, what if we are skillful writers who are terrible at self-promoting? This is a good question. And this is actually something that I still kind of struggle with. Because I think when it comes to promoting yourself, it's more about networking and less about promoting. I think when I started writing, I thought, I have to have a website. I'm going to have to make a LinkedIn. I'm going to have to, maybe get a business card, go to networking events or whatever. And I tried some of that stuff and it just never worked. And that's why I talk about repeat business and referrals, because those are so much more important than just promoting yourself, at least in my opinion. And they're much more surefire, because when you're promoting yourself, you're often promoting yourself to new groups of people who have never met you before, and you have to sell yourself over and over and over again. And when you have a repeat client, you don't have to do that. You just get more work. When you have referral, you just, you have to do a lot less work. When you're promoting yourself, through whether that's a website or a networking event or something like that, it just takes a lot of energy and it usually doesn't pan out. Now, I'm not saying they're worthless. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I'm saying that they didn't work for me and they generally take a lot of work. So take that for what you will. But I would say if you're bad at promoting, definitely focus on networking more. Just focus on meeting people. Focus on expanding your network of writers, because often the writers will have contacts that they can share with you. And I think that's going to be more important than just, trying to promote yourself through a website or through a networking event or something like that. Someone asked, how do you suggest a new writer hones their craft? Sometimes you have great ideas, but can never really put together an article. This is a good question. We actually have an entire course on how to write a freelance article from scratch, because it's such, it's a tough topic. What I would recommend is just studying other articles. And this is what I did for, years, and I still do. I mean, in an effort to improve myself and all that, I still do. I read other articles, I analyze them. Like I talked about in the webinar, I analyze them for style, for voice, for topic, for perspective, for all these things. And I kind of ask, okay, what are they doing that maybe I'm not doing? Or what are they doing that's different from me? And, how do they put together an article? How do they synthesize all this information into a coherent article? That's very important to me, because that allows me to see not only what other people are doing, but also why it works. So if you're starting out, I would definitely say just study other articles. Look at your favorite blogs, your favorite publications, look at random publications even, look at, some well-known ones, and analyze what other writers are doing. Someone else asked, are print opportunities less valued? That's a good and a really interesting question. I wouldn't say less valued so much as less common. The thing with print is that, and I know we have a lot of older writers who are used to the print medium. Print publications have just kind of gone down the wayside for many reasons, from everything from environmental reasons to just, obsolescence reasons. There are a lot of reasons, but generally digital publications are just kind of what people are doing now. And so I think that's a more, just a better avenue to take just because there are more jobs. I wouldn't say print opportunities are less valued, but I do think that they're harder to find, and the opportunity, kind of the scope of opportunity isn't really there. Like when I say that, what I mean is digital publications, since there are so many of them and since there are so many ways to easily contribute to a digital publication, there's a lot more opportunity there. The spectrum of opportunity is a lot wider. When it comes to print, you're dealing with fewer opportunities, you're dealing with fewer publications, you're dealing with fewer editors, and you're dealing with just a less interest in the medium as a whole. And of course, this isn't true for every niche. I'm just kind of speaking generally, but I would say if you're going after print opportunities, just know what you're looking for. Make sure that, everything else still applies that I've talked about, all this pitching stuff, but just make sure that you know what you're going after, and I think you'll be fine. So I hope that answers your question. I kind of rambled a bit, but it's an interesting question, and I'd be curious to know other people's takes on it. Here's a good question. Someone asked, how does a budding writer continue honing his or her craft without getting discouraged because of rejections by some publications? This is an interesting one because I think this comes down to mindset. And of course, that's probably no surprise, but specifically, I think it comes down to a kind of inner versus outer mindset. I never really had this, and I this kind of fear, and I know a lot of writers have had it, this fear of rejection. And I think this is really common in creative writers, which just makes sense because if you pour your heart and soul into something and it's very personal and raw and it gets rejected, it feels like someone just, said that they hated your kid. But when it comes to freelance writing, you do have to take a more business-oriented mindset to that. So whenever I've submitted, if I got a no, I was just like, okay, well that's unfortunate, but I got to move on. I got to pay my bills. I got to try again. I got to move forward to the next opportunity. And I think if you move to that mindset, it becomes less about you, because the reality is whenever you get a rejection, it's not usually a direct reflection on your quality. It's usually more a reflection on the publication's needs or the business's needs. Because like I said, a lot of businesses and publications are very picky. There's a lot of competition. They want the best person for them. And if they don't believe that you're the best person for them, and honestly, a lot of times you won't be the perfect person for every job, and that's okay, then they'll have to turn you down in favor of someone else. But it's just because someone else fit their needs more. And of course, this has so many layers. I could talk about this for hours because it goes into, you need to make sure that you're communicating your value. You need to make sure that you're selecting your clients and publications correctly. You need to make sure that you don't let it get you down. But overall, I would say don't see it as a reflection of your own quality, because it's usually not. Think about the business and their needs, the publication and their needs. And once you start thinking like that, it will become a lot easier to deal with the times when you do get a no, because you'll just know that it wasn't a good fit. Here's a good question. And this sort of references what I talked about earlier with freelancing platforms and content mills. But someone asked, do you recommend using any sites that charge you a fee to help find freelance writing work? Absolutely not. I kind of loathe these sites with a passion. And anyone who's been in one of our webinars before will know that. I started out on a freelancing platform where they took, I think, 20%. And on top of that, I had a PayPal fee. And so I remember distinctly, for every $5 I made, I would get $3.92 of that. So that's really not a lot. And especially when you're talking about bigger, jobs, like for every 100 I made, I would get 78 something or other. And I just don't think those sites are fair. It's, there are so many better ways that are so much better to getting work out there to finding clients to getting jobs than to having to go through a middleman like that. I'm really against that, and I know a lot of writers use that because it's easy, because there's an available client base. I get that, but trust me when I say that the extra work you put into networking and to just building yourself up as a writer, that's going to be far more beneficial and far more financially beneficial for you than just kind of getting these quick wins. I do want to give a shout out to Michelle. She said, Ian, please emphasize not writing for free ever. It's 2 steps backward for the writer and doesn't push the craft/profession forward for all of us pros. Always strive to be a pro. I agree 100%. I definitely think that writing for free is a bad thing, at least generally speaking. If you're doing it for a friend or something, that's a different story. I have talked in the past about writing for free to get started. I don't really think that needs to be a thing. I think that, that is definitely one path that some writers take, but it's not at all. As I've shown in this webinar, you can get paid for your first writing job without any prior experience. And, that's not, writing for free over and over again is not a good thing because, like Michelle said, it undervalues you as a writer. And I feel like a lot of writers don't value themselves highly enough. You're providing a unique creative service that not a lot of people in the world, generally speaking, can do. Like, sure, there are a lot of freelance writers. There's a lot of competition. But on the other hand, not a lot of people can do what you do. And, you're providing a service that is highly sought after. There are so many opportunities for writing right now. I know writers who have literally gotten paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for just a single project. And, when you get into like the big game, so to speak, that's what you can be dealing with. And even if you don't make that much, still, you don't have to write for free is what I'm saying. So thank you, Michelle, for saying that. Definitely agree 100%. And that's a good message to send to everyone because, and I think, like I said, I think even more important than not writing for free is not undervaluing yourself. And that can be tricky to do, especially if you have, these kind of fears of rejection and whatnot. But I promise you, if you can get over those hurdles, it becomes a lot easier from here on out. I think we'll take maybe 2 more questions and then I'll let you all go. Here's a good question that kind of goes in tandem with that one. Perry asks, is medium.com a good way to get noticed and find work as a freelance writer? Yes and no. I'm not a big fan of Medium because it's basically, it is writing for free. It is writing to a platform, but the problem with platforms like that is that they kind of boast their audience, and that's sort of their value proposition is that, oh, hey, you write, we'll bring the audience to you. But it usually doesn't work like that. On sites like that, it can be really hard to get anyone's attention because there are just so many writers on that platform, so many publications on that platform, that it really doesn't behoove new writers to use them just because it's so hard to stand out from the crowd when you're plunging headfirst into the crowd. So I definitely wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but I wouldn't count on it as a way to get noticed and find work as a freelance writer like you asked. So let's do one more question. Someone asked why I button the top button on my shirt. I can't breathe if I do that. Yeah, I like it for the neat look usually. I try to look as professional as possible for all of you. Here's a good question to end on, I think. And it's a very interesting question. Valerie asks, do clients prefer inexperienced writers with college degrees? This is interesting because usually you hear it, on the flip side, maybe you'll have an experienced writer without a degree, like I was for many years while I was still in college. I think that's an interesting question. I wouldn't say prefer, but I don't think that college degrees matter as much as they did. I do think that if we're talking about experience versus a degree, experience is definitely more important. It's nice to have a degree, and it definitely shows experience, but really these days what clients want is to see your work in action. They want to see it, they want to see what you've gotten published. And so in that vein, it's a lot better to to have experience rather than a degree, but of course both help. If you are inexperienced but you have a degree, definitely use that for your advantage. Make a big deal out of it, draw attention to it. But if you don't, don't worry about it. And like I've shown here, you don't need any experience or any degree to get started with any of this. So I think with that, I will wrap things up for today. Like I mentioned, we will be sending out those 3 resources to you over the next few days via your email. So just keep an eye out on your inbox and we'll send those to you. If you have a question that I didn't get to, feel free to email us at support@writinglaunch.com and we will definitely get back to you on that. And really, I hope you've enjoyed today's webinar. We'll be in touch about the resources and about some other exciting things that we have coming up soon. And again, don't hesitate to reach out and start a dialogue. I love talking about this stuff. I love helping writers. It's, I try to keep it short for all of you because any more than an hour is really kind of overwhelming. But I hope you've had a good time here today. And I hope that you are able to use this information to your benefit. And I'm confident it will work for you. I'm confident that this will get you on the right path. So if you've been struggling as a freelance writer so far, I hope that maybe we can help mitigate that a bit. So thank you all very much for watching and have an absolutely wonderful day.